Spacer blocks for the fence, tongue, and groove, a locked-in depth from a test cut, a true 90-degree blade, and a flat, uninterrupted router table. Get these right, and everything else just falls into place. My goal here is a 4-inch wide tongue, shaped using a 1/2-inch rabbiting bit. That rabbiting bit creates a 1/2-inch shoulder on both sides of the tongue, which means the matching groove must be 1 inch wider than the tongue. Because of that, the leg stock ultimately needs to be tongue width plus 1 inch. I don't cut the leg stock to final width yet. Instead, I wait until the tongues are cut, measure the actual finished tongue width, then cut the leg stock to that measurement plus 1 inch. That extra step gives me room to recover if something goes slightly off earlier. Once everything is milled, I clearly mark the pieces where the tongues will be cut. I'm not using these marks to define width, the spacer blocks do that. These marks exist purely to avoid cutting the wrong face or wrong piece, which I've done more than once. I set the blade height to 1/2 inch and tape a spacer block to the fence with double-sided tape. That block is there to prevent kickback. All cuts are made using a cross-cut sled or a miter gauge, never between the blade and the fence. After squaring the miter gauge to the blade, I make a test cut to confirm depth. Once I'm happy with it, the blade height stays locked until the tongue and groove are both complete. To establish the tongue width, I start with a scrap piece. I place the tongue spacer block, in this case 4 inches minus the blade curve, against the fence spacer and make the first cut. Then I remove the spacer block, place the workpiece directly against the fence spacer, and make the second cut. This method ensures the blade curve stays inside the cut, not added to the width. Without this step, the tongue can easily end up wider than intended by exactly 1 blade thickness. If that happens here, it's still recoverable since the leg stock hasn't been cut to final width yet, but this avoids the problem altogether. Once I verify the spacing on scrap, I repeat the exact same process in the actual workpiece. Because I work in a small shop, I usually cut all 4 tongues on a single long board, then cut them into individual pieces later. Maloof joints are often used to connect long rails to legs, dining tables, coffee tables, and similar builds, and handling long, heavy hardwood pieces on a small contractor saw isn't safe or comfortable. This approach also has a second benefit in my scenario. It avoids me bringing small, awkward parts to the router table later. Before moving to the router table, I clean the tongue faces thoroughly. This step is critical. The router bearing rides directly on these faces, and any unevenness here will be transferred into the rabbet. Flat and smooth matters here. I use a white side rabbiting bit with a 1/2 inch cutting depth and length, a 1.5 inch overall diameter, and a 1/2 inch bearing. This geometry creates a 3/4 inch radius at the corners of the rabbet. But I don't use the full depth of the bit's 1/2 inch cut automatically. I go by feel, leaving enough material so the tongue remains strong and the lip is well defined. At the router table, the key is control. Keep the piece as flat as possible, maintain consistent pressure into the bit, let the bearing ride smoothly along the cleaned face. Repeat this process for both sides of the tongue. Next, I measure the actual thickness of the finished tongue and cut a groove spacer to that exact thickness. When cutting the spacer, I account for the blade curve so the curve stays inside the spacer width. Before touching the real parts, I use the spacer on a scrap piece of the same species, not plywood or construction lumber. Different woods I found cut differently. I cut a sample groove and test the fit on the tongue. The fit should be snug with noticeable friction. Using the same fence setup and the groove spacer, I lock the fence. I cut the grooves by removing material from the 3 sides of the leg stock. This is where the earlier marking becomes crucial. Orientation mistakes here are permanent. Double check which face is inside and which face is outside before every cut. The blade height has not changed since cutting the tongues. Keeping that depth locked is what guarantees the tongue and groove seat flush. Once the grooves are cut, I clean them up and test fit the joint. Minor adjustments can be made with slight sanding or a rasp, but you need to be careful not to disturb the rabbet outline. Any deviation here will show in the final joint. At this point, I separate the tongues. This is specific to my workflow, so you can skip it. I switch to a 3/4 inch roundover bit at the router table to match the radius created by the rabbiting bit. I never remove all the material in one pass. I take at least 2 lighter passes. The last step is to lightly round the edges of the grooves using a rasp or chisel. This helps the joint seat cleanly without forcing it. Always dry fit before glue. Joints should slide together smoothly with firm resistance. No bashing the hell out of it, but also no looseness. If you can hold it upside down and it doesn't fall apart, you're there. And that's it. A Maloof joint that's strong, repeatable, and in my opinion, one of the most beautiful joints you can make.